Federal litigator Gabriel Malor explains the practical effect of Donald Trump's felony convictions on his gun rights and potential paths for him to regain them. That and more on this episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast.
No, the devil's got no hold on me.
All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Gutowski. I'm also a CNN contributor and the founder of thereload.com, where you can head over and sign up for our free newsletter today if you want to keep up to date with what's going on with guns in America. This week, we are discussing what, everybody else in the country is probably discussing. Donald Trump, the former president and current front runner for the 2024 election, according to the polls, has been convicted of 34 felony counts in New York. And this has some pretty significant implications over his gun rights. And to discuss that, we have a federal appellate lawyer with us and legal commentator, Gabriel Malor. Welcome to the show, Gabe. Thank you for joining us. How are you doing?
Hi, Stephen. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Can you tell people just a little bit more about yourself for anyone who might not know who you are?
Yeah, I'm an appellate litigator. I was based in D.C. for many, many years and then moved down to Virginia. And I work all over the country, all the circuit courts. I have had cases in every single one except for the federal circuit, and I have argued in almost all of them. I'm still trying to get argument in front of the 5th and the 11th circuits, but I've got the rest.
There you go. You're like getting stickers to put on your refrigerator.
Yeah. It's my bucket list. I would like to get all of the at least all numbered circuits plus DC before the end.
Do they make one of those maps like with the national parks where you can put like the every national park you visit? They have that for federal circuit courts.
No, but we should.
And you've also, of course, written extensively for a number of outlets over the years too, right?
Yes, everything from National Review, New York Times did one for me. Let me see, what else have I done? Washington Examiner, The Federalist before things changed over there. The Dispatch, of course, is my current. You can find me over there talking a lot about Trump's cases.
So speaking of which, let's talk about Trump's cases. I don't think we need to necessarily get into the details of the case itself. We're trying to more focused on the effects of the convictions that he's now been found guilty of. That doesn't sound right, but the guilty verdict from the jury and how it's going to affect, in particular, his gun rights. So this is state convictions, right? These are felony convictions in the state of New York. This was not a federal case. So how does that play out in terms of Trump's ability to possess firearms?
So state convictions still have federal consequences. There's what's called the felon-in-possession ban, which is a federal law that prohibits people who've been convicted for crimes punishable by more than a year from owning or possessing a weapon. And that fits these charges. These charges are punishable by more than a year in prison. Trump's very unlikely to get any incarceration time, but it just matters that the crime itself is punishable by that much. And all 34 counts are. So with this conviction, he becomes a, quote, prohibited person under federal law, which means everywhere he is forbidden from owning a gun. Yeah,
and I imagine that there's state statutes that mirror that federal statute as well, both in
Florida,
New York,
Florida, where Trump resides, is one of those states that also has a felon in possession ban, which would apply to him if the convictions stand up on appeal.
Right. So it's sort of a 3 times over situation where if he possesses a gun, it's going to be illegal in many different ways, I guess.
Right. And this is sort of getting into the weeds, and maybe I'm jumping ahead of where you are. The 11th Circuit, which covers Florida, where Trump resides, recently upheld the federal felon in possession ban, even after the Supreme Court's recent change to the way we look at gun crimes. There is a slight circuit split on that. So it's possible that the Supreme Court could take up the question.
Right.
But I think unlikely at this point. It's a little early. And of course, we still have a couple of Second Amendment cases coming from the Supreme Court this term. By the end of June, they may offer some clarification on how that's going to work.
Yeah, I definitely want to get more into that later on the show. But but first I want to just talk about sort of the practical effects here. So first off, there's some quibbling I've seen among reporters on the specifics of what it means to be convicted. The jury handed out their verdict. When does he actually meet that felon definition under federal law?
Right now. Okay. He has been convicted of these crimes, which are punishable by more than a year in prison.
So you don't have to wait for sentencing or anything like that. It's just as soon as the jury's verdict.
He has been convicted as of right now, or as of yesterday. But sentencing will be in a month. Before then, we've got a lot of moving parts. There's going to be what's called motions practice. Todd Blanche, that's Trump's attorney, he's going to be able to challenge the verdict. He's going to file motions saying the trial was unfair in some way. He's going to say things like Stormy Daniels' testimony should have been excluded because it was so inflammatory. Whatever he thinks could have made the trial unfair. And also he could challenge the jury instructions. I know that was in the news a lot this week. So Todd Blanche is going to do that first. Oh, the other one I would think of is venue, because Trump, of course, maintains that he can't get a fair trial in New York City. He, suggested that the trial should be moved somewhere else in the state, presumably.
So we'll have a bunch of reasons that he could for appeal here, which I think they've already announced they're going to do that, and sort of foregone conclusion anyway. But yeah, and so how does that affect this as the appeals process move forward? I'd imagine it doesn't have any effect. He's still going to be a prohibited person. Yeah,
he's a prohibited person until the convictions are overturned or expunged. That's the other route, and we can talk about this when we talk about his gun rights. He could eventually regain his gun rights if the conviction were expunged.
Right, although there's some complications to that too.
Yeah, that's way down the line. At the moment, he has July 11th is going to be sentencing. Before that, he's going to sit down with a what's called for a pre-sentence report, where he has to do an interview, and then they decide what their recommendation is going to be in terms of his sentence, which, like I said, it's unlikely to be jail time or prison time because he's a first-time offender. These are white-collar crimes. They're nonviolent. And also, I don't know how much the court's going to weigh that factor, but it's going to be really hard to imprison a person who's under 24/7 protection by the Secret Service, because you're essentially imprisoning his Secret Service agents too.
Right. We'll get to some of the weirder implications of all this.
To answer your question, though, about what happens, he has until August 10th to file for appeal. And then even after the appellate division in New York takes it, their New York Court of Appeals, which is their highest level court, they can take the case. And after that, the Supreme Court of the United States could take the case. So that's got a very long process to work out. That's going to go way beyond the election.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of these legal troubles that he's gotten into are going to drag out way beyond the election, it sounds like. I guess that's kind of one of the key bits of the election is, whether or not the federal prosecutions would go away if he won. I mean, it seems extremely likely that he would fire those prosecutors, but that's kind of ancillary to what we're talking about. Although one point I do want to get into is that up to this point, he already had some restrictions on his gun rights, right? Because under felony indictment, I don't know, you could hopefully answer this. Is it just for federal felony indictments, or is it any felony indictment where you can't obtain new guns during that period?
Yeah, during this process, and first of all, he is under federal indictment, so that's covered too. But during this whole process, he's forbidden from purchasing any new weapons
or obtaining them at all in any way. Like he can't be gifted them either, which actually became kind of an issue back in October when someone showed him a gun with his face on it, and he said he was going to buy it, but actually a fairly common thing for pro-gun politicians to have somebody give them a gun on the campaign trail would be a crime here, even before this felony indictment. Right?
Yeah, and even before now, but certainly now he cannot take possession of any firearms. Any firearms that are in his possession, he needs to dispose of. They need to go to somebody else.
Right, and we don't necessarily know if he personally owns guns. Obviously, his sons are very big gun enthusiasts, especially Don Jr. Trump himself has had a concealed carry permit in the past in New York. Presumably he has owned guns before. I'm sure people have given him commemorative guns, as people want to do with pro-gun politicians, or people like Donald Trump. And so it's not clear if he owns any at the moment. Let's say he does. what's the procedure he's going to have to follow now?
Well, he needs to sell them, give them away. They need to not be in his possession anymore, which means anything he's got at his residence in Mar-a-Lago, that has to go to somebody else. And of course, we don't really know whether that will occur or how it would occur. But just, to be in compliance with the law, he cannot possess a firearm anymore.
And there's an aspect of this that I think a lot of people don't really know about or understand, which is called constructive possession, where this usually comes into play with stuff like people's spouses. If you're convicted of a felony or you're some other way a prohibited person under federal law, your spouse can still own guns if they're not prohibited. However, they can't own them in a way that you would have access to them. Is that basically? Yeah,
usually it turns on access and control. In other words, who has the ability to access and use that weapon? And we, like I said, we do see this in spouse cases. Usually, if the police are serving a warrant on, for example, an apartment that a man shares with his spouse, and the spouse, and the man's a felon, but the spouse isn't, and they see a gun in plain view on the coffee table. Well, whose gun is it? She's going to say, "Oh, it's mine," but he has access, he has control. There's nothing stopping him from possessing that gun. So in a circumstance like that, we would say that, oh, you're a felon in possession. This is constructive possession. So Trump is going to have to worry about that in terms of Mar-a-Lago. I mean, he owns the place. He has access, presumably, to all of it. Anybody who wants to keep a gun there, it has to be very clear that those aren't Trump's guns.
Because it's like a hotel, right? It's like
he's surrounded by armed guards at all times. We would never suggest, or I hope not, that the Secret Service's guns are Trump's guns.
Right. Yeah, I guess this is where we can get into some of the weirder aspects of all this, because he's a former president and now a convicted felon, and he has Secret Service protection. So there are people around him at all times with guns. But presumably, and I guess we just don't really. I mean, I assume maybe there's been somebody in the past who's like the relative of somebody under Secret Service protection that also gets, like the president's children or something like that. Maybe this issue has come up. I can't think of any examples.
We're about to see that issue with Hunter Biden, right?
Right. Yeah, Hunter
potentially is going to be convicted, and actually at the moment, right?
Does he get? And he gets Secret Service protection too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, right. And part of his plea deal would have had him, the one that fell apart, part of that would have had it so that he couldn't possess guns. Although I guess he wouldn't have been a prohibited. It was kind of like an agreement. It wasn't an official status as a prohibited person.
Right. Because that
he may end up that way.
Yeah. The whole point with that agreement was that he was going to avoid other charges, which obviously fell apart and didn't happen. And now, of course, he's facing both the tax charges and the gun charges.
Although I suppose in theory, but I guess that was, oh man, this is such a weird.
The funny thing about the Hunter Biden case is he would be a prohibited person under the drug user.
The drug user,
which is different than the Trump case.
But he wasn't under Secret Service protection at the time that he bought that gun. That was actually one of the controversies in this situation because the Secret Service, for some reason, got involved in that situation and went and tried to take the background check forms from the gun store where he bought the gun.
Yeah, there was some shady business there.
Yeah, there was some
part of that, and you've got to emphasize, and you know this because you've lived in DC, is that the Secret Service has to be able to work with its protectees, right? It can't have a rogue protectee, which means they will do things like that. They will look out for their interests beyond just not,
But the weird thing about that was that he wasn't under at the time. This was before. I think it was 2018. So it was before his father. His father had been vice president, but Hunter wasn't getting Secret Service protection after that. And it was before Joe Biden started to run for president. So that was the weird part about it, is that the Secret Service, maybe he had previously been under their protection, but he wasn't at that moment. And so it's strange that they got involved in his whole gun situation in 2018. But yeah, he may end up being convicted of these gun charges and then be a prohibited person after the fact. In fact, there's some possibility, and we'll get to this a little more later, the more serious, I think, legal recourses under the Second Amendment, but we're living in fascinating times, right? Interesting times, right? Just like the curse. And there's some possibility that Hunter Biden has already made Second Amendment claims in his current case. Donald Trump has an opportunity to make Second Amendment claims against the felon in possession ban if he chooses to, moving forward now. And the Supreme Court may consider all of these things together as they could combine cases. Obviously, this is way down the line, hypothetical stuff.
It would be seriously
impossible
interesting if, because of Hunter Biden, we got a Supreme Court decision on whether or not the drug user ban is constitutional. And the same thing, Trump can also challenge the felon in possession ban.
We can get them together as one case.
Under Bruin, the question is whether the nation had a history and tradition of regulating firearms in this manner. And there is actually pretty good reason to believe that we didn't regulate drug users this way. The founders didn't.
Yeah.
They
just didn't.
It's worse for the felon in possession ban because we did ban groups of people. The problem with that one, at least in my opinion, is the founders were happy to ban disfavored groups. So it was Black people, it was Catholics. The Quakers got a gun ban during the founding era. And it's just like, is that really the basis on which we can say that felons as undesirables? I mean, I really think Bruin kind of created its own problem there because, the founders were pretty racist. They were pretty bigoted. They were willing to tolerate some laws that we today would think are just unconscionable.
Right. The big question is whether they would count as valid historical precedents. There's a whole debate over that in the courts.
So hopefully the Supreme Court still has Rahimi in front of it. It'll be issued by the end of June. Hopefully we get some clarification. And
there's definitely some more serious possibilities that the Supreme Court will weigh in on felon in possession, or really just the prohibited persons list and the Gun Control Act generally and how it works well before a Hunter Biden or Donald Trump appeal could make it up there. But we'll discuss the more serious aspects of the challenges in a moment. But let's go back real quick to the practical side here. So Secret Service protection, constructive possession. He lives in a hotel, basically, right? That's my understanding of how Mar-a-Lago works. There's people around all the time, probably people who have guns. I don't know. Maybe the Secret Service doesn't allow you to have guns at Mar-a-Lago. That wouldn't be surprising. They don't allow you to have guns, for instance, when you go see Trump speak at the NRA annual meetings, even though guns are generally allowed in the rest of the conference. They're not allowed at that event. Maybe Secret Service bans you from taking guns into Mar-a-Lago altogether. I don't know that one way or the other. But it opens some strange questions. And then of course there's the Secret Service itself carrying guns around Donald Trump, who will be a prohibited person moving forward. We're assuming, right, that we don't know, because like we just went over, I don't know of any examples of this before. There may well have been prohibited persons under Secret Service protection in the past, but I don't know of any examples specifically. Presumably, a Secret Service officer carrying a firearm around the former president is not a form of constructive possession. They're probably not leaving their guns just lying around near him, right? That's just...
Yeah, I wouldn't think
that's not very unlikely, right?
It is very unlikely. This Secret Service has had a lot of problems, including on one memorable occasion leaving a firearm in a restroom, but not around Trump. At least not so far as we've ever heard.
Right. So it's just one of these weird thought experiments, given the extremely unique nature of what's happened here. But it does seem like one where that's probably not going to be an actual. Plus, like, law enforcement is generally accepted from a lot of these kinds of
right, and also it'd be difficult, though not impossible, to ever find out. Usually, these constructive possession cases come up when the government or the police officers are serving a warrant on someone, and it's happened before to Trump, but hopefully won't be happening anymore going forward. The FBI raid on Mar-a-Lago was very focused on recovering documents, not, are there any weapons lying in plain view? Is the gun case locked? Stuff like that, right. Which is how you would have to get to, does Trump have a firearm?
Right. Yeah, that seems much more realistic, and it just doesn't seem like it will actually be a problem. So just essentially the rule here will be as long as Trump avoids possessing firearms directly himself, it's unlikely he's going to run into any significant legal issues, right?
Right, until either the convictions are overturned or expunged.
Yeah. Okay. And honestly, to be frank about it, while he's had that concealed carry license and implies that he's owned guns in the past, I don't think there's a single picture or video of him actually shooting a gun that I can recall ever seeing.
I can't recall one either, which is unusual because you usually see the politicians are happy to show, oh, I'm a hunting guy.
Yeah, especially somebody who like Trump, who's kind of been, at least rhetorically, very pro-gun. Obviously he's got a bit more of a mixed policy record. We talked about that.
The bump stock ban
update. Yeah, the bump stock ban. He's made different comments at different points, both while as president and before he was in politics in his books. But even Obama has a picture of him shooting Skeet or whatever from Camp David. It's a little weird to think about because Trump he's the first president. He was the first president to go and speak to the NRA since Ronald Reagan. And he's spoken every single year since he got into politics. But I don't think I've ever seen him shoot a gun or even handle a gun in like a shooter stance, if that makes any sense.
Well, I know he's received them as gifts. So
yeah. Who knows what happens with those? I doubt he keeps them around himself, but I don't know. Maybe that's something he'll have to actually put thought into what he's going to do with any of these guns he's received as gifts over the years. And nobody can give, they already couldn't give him gift guns before this conviction because of the indictments, but they really can't give him, they can't even hand him the gun now to hold at this point, right?
Right. And hopefully we won't see from Trump the sorts of things we see from a lot of criminal defendants where they post on social media with a gun in the background. And then police and the FBI do monitor social media. Like we are aware of, felons who are posting Facebook photos of themselves holding guns. Presumably Trump's not going to do that. Hopefully his lawyers have, told him, hey, don't post any campaign ads with guns in them. He
has kind of leaned into the whole like criminals or cool outlaw thing with, since the mugshot and all that. I doubt that he's going to do something like that. But yeah, it feels like, the political implications, which we talked about on the news update in detail, are probably a bigger deal than the actual practical legal implications for him not being able to own guns, just because he's not really a gun guy. His sons are. If it was Don Jr., it'd be a different story. It'd be a much bigger sacrifice to him for him not to, have to transfer his guns out of possession or whatever. For Donald Trump himself, it's probably not that.
As a practical matter, doesn't seem like a big deal for him. But just as a legal matter, if you have your rights taken from you, I'd be a little mad over it. even if I didn't own guns, or I'd be kind of like, well, look, I'm still a citizen of this country, and believe that my convictions are unfair.
Right, and it's it's weird and wild and whatever, but it is very serious. It's a very serious situation. Having a president be convicted, former president and candidate for office being convicted of felonies is a serious thing. We don't need to dive into the debate over the charges or the convictions or whatever. People can make up their own minds. So I don't think that's what they're looking to me for necessarily in this. I'm happy to give my opinion to people if they ask me, and I share it on social media probably more than I should, but that's not what we're here to do. We're to talk about the gun implications. And one of the things though that gets at is the fight over these prohibitions generally. This is a lifetime ban at the federal level, right? Yes. So let's go into you mentioned earlier that there are ways to have your rights restored, at least under state law, right?
Yes. So both New York, where these convictions took place, and Florida have processes to expunge crimes and to restore your rights as a gun owner. And you could pursue those. The real thing, though, of course, the federal ban, that wouldn't affect the federal ban, to bring him off of the prohibited persons list as a felon in possession, he would need to have these convictions expunged under New York law. In other words, they would be wiped out ab initio from the creation. And at that point, he could regain his gun rights. It is a process in New York, but he otherwise checks all the boxes. These are nonviolent crimes. They were first-time offender, stuff like that, where he can eventually apply to New York and say, and he has to fulfill all the terms of his sentence. So whatever probationary period is imposed. So that may take time depending on how long of probation New York gives him.
Right, but it's possible for him to get his rights back under New York and Florida, where his state of residence and the state where he was convicted, but that wouldn't have an effect on the federal.
Right. Yeah, he actually needs the convictions to either be overturned or expunged. That would have the effect of restoring his federal rights.
And how would expungement work?
It's a process you have to apply to. I'm sure his lawyers are aware of it. I'm sure they will do it eventually. But like I said, you first have to complete the terms of your sentence. So we're still in a waiting period to hear what that's going to be for him.
What happens if he? Well, I suppose there's no way for. Does New York have a sort of pardon power, the governor, or commutations or something?
Yeah,
like
actually,
that?
the governor could pardon him. That's a thought.
Because the president wouldn't have any role here, even if Trump became president again, or Biden decided.
No, he can't pardon state crimes.
Yeah. So that it'd have to be the governor in New York, and but there is a process there in theory.
Yeah, you can apply for a pardon. I don't particularly see a chance of that happening in Trump's case, at least not in New York.
Yeah, probably not. Maybe a commutation or something where if he's sentenced to prison time, they might reduce that to. It's just hard to imagine.
It's unlikely he's going to get prison time, and it's I think unlikely that he would have the conviction pardoned. I just don't really see that happening.
Yeah, fair. So that really means that even whatever he could do at the state level, this federal ban is a lifetime ban. There's no and I think they've even stripped funding from the process to have your records removed from NICS, if I understand that.
But yeah, I wouldn't make a difference in Trump's case. I mean, he's a felon, and if he's found to be in possession, then he could be prosecutable under that statute. So long as the statute's not changed. Congress could, of course, change this if it wanted to. And maybe if Trump won the election, he could say, the odds are that we get a Republican Congress if we get a Republican president. So he could always say, hey, guys, do me a favor.
But probably not a 60-seat majority that they could get rid of the filibuster.
I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, who knows? Who knows what's going to happen in the election. I think more likely, though, than the law changing dramatically because of this is what you alluded to earlier, which are these lawsuits. That seems like a more realistic path to Trump actually getting his rights restored.
Yes,
under the Second Amendment.
I think I mentioned the 11th Circuit has upheld the felon in possession ban, but the Ninth Circuit in March held that it was unconstitutional as applied to a particular nonviolent offender. And of course, these are nonviolent felonies that Trump has been convicted of. So there is a little bit of a circuit split, which means there's a non-trivial chance the Supreme Court could be asked to step in and decide
there's also the Third Circuit as well, right? With the range ruling on that was the guy who lied on the food stamp form.
Did they restore his? I can't remember the details of that one.
It was an as-applied challenge, similar to the California one, where essentially range lie in the 90s. He lied on a application for food stamps, which was a state misdemeanor in Pennsylvania, but was one punishable by up to 2 years in prison. Yeah. So it activated the felon in possession statute at the federal level. And so he's been unable to possess guns since then. And the Third Circuit, and it's definitely a panel. It might have been en banc as well. I can't recall off the top of my head. But the Third Circuit, the last ruling on that was that the law was unconstitutional as applied to range in particular, because he was a nonviolent felon. There was no dangerousness. And then you mentioned Rahimi earlier, which is sort of the other side of the coin here, because Rahimi is a case about a domestic violence restraint, somebody who's subject to a domestic violence restraining order who was arrested with a gun after he went on a unrelated crime spree. They searched his house and found a firearm, which I think goes to the constructive possession part. They've just found a gun in his room, essentially.
I'm really hopeful that the Supreme Court takes Rahimi as an opportunity to clarify the Bruin standard, because the point in Rahimi in the Fifth Circuit, which struck down the domestic violence offender ban or restraining order ban, because they said, look, the founding era had no analog for this. They didn't disarm abusers back then, and they didn't disarm them when the 14th Amendment was ratified either. So the Supreme Court now needs to tell us, how are we actually supposed to look at this when we're looking at things like the domestic violence? I mean, domestic violence was just not something that was prosecuted back then. It was something that was just existed. They put up with it, which is deplorable. And does that mean that Congress? Does that mean that Congress really can never regulate domestic violence offenders or suspects in this manner? I would hope not, but that's the way that Bruin points, and the Supreme Court needs to tell us a little more about it. And in doing so, they can also probably tell us a little more about how we should be analyzing the felon in possession ban, and for Hunter Biden, the drug user ban.
Yeah, and if you listen to the oral arguments in Rahimi, which happened back, I think it was in November, so we've been waiting quite a while on this case. It's probably going to be out in June sometime, I would expect. But the oral arguments pointed to, again, the other side of the coin, the nonviolent versus violent, or dangerousness as being perhaps the standard they might go with. There was some precedent for this from Justice Barrett, who wrote in a case called Cantor that
when she was on the Seventh Circuit,
yeah, it was kind of an aside, but she set up this whole dangerousness standard in a dissent where she said that people who aren't dangerous, people who aren't felons, shouldn't be prohibited from owning guns for the rest of their life. But on the flip side of that was this idea that people who are dangerous, or that they could be prohibited. And that's, I don't know, that seems maybe where the court is headed here.
Well, we will know by the end of June.
Yeah, and so that could have a direct impact on Trump and his circumstance, or Hunter Biden too, of course. But yeah, I mean, I think that's the more realistic way that Trump gets back his gun rights, at least within a relatively quick period of time. All the other options would probably take much longer, expungement or his own as applied challenged for himself, or something like that. Those things would take years.
Given the timelines involved, I mean, we are going to vote in this next election before we know how all that's going to be resolved, just because appeals take time. He doesn't lose his voting rights in Florida. He can run for office, and he can take office as a felon. There's no prohibition on that. But
kind of a funny dichotomy there. He can't own guns, but he can be president. He can be president. He can run the military.
He's the self-appointed leader of the gun rights community, and he can't own a gun right now.
That is a wild thing. We talked about that on the news update as well. The political implications of, and not only that happened, but just that it happened without any even really discussion of this possibility during the primaries from either his opponents or the gun rights groups.
Well,
the gun rights
part of that, I think, stems from people just didn't take these charges seriously enough. I mean, people really sort of treated them as an afterthought to the federal charges, or maybe the Georgia RICO case. But I mean, when it comes to the federal felon in possession ban, any felony will do, anything that's punishable by more than a year in prison.
Right. And it happens that these were the ones that popped first, but any of them, and being convicted on any of them would have put him in the same boat. And it's just a bit odd that nobody thought were that worthy of discussion on the gun rights community. I mean, because now the choice is between, somebody who's extremely hostile to their views and Joe Biden and wants to restrict firearms pretty significantly from this. I mean, he's still running on enacting another assault weapons ban, which would, of course, go after things like the AR-15, which are very popular rifles, and so on and so forth. He's done a lot of executive actions through federal rulemaking to restrict firearms. And then the other side is somebody who can't legally own guns. That's a rough choice for gun rights voters. Now, maybe they would have come to the same conclusion that it was worth it because they, as Trump claims, all this stuff is rigged against him, and maybe people buy in that, or it's worth fighting it, or even it would make a good test case for the felon in possession law if Trump's the one challenging it. I don't know. Like maybe
you and I
you could have come to that conclusion. It's just weird to not have a discussion.
We talked about how he's never been really a gun guy.
Sure.
But so maybe that, that's why it wasn't talked up so much. We're not so much worried about that for him in particular, just because unlike, Joe Average, who would like to have a gun, Trump is just kind of, does he need it? I mean, one thing we know for sure is Trump doesn't need a weapon for self-defense. I mean, that's the whole heart of all of the resurgence in Second Amendment jurisprudence in the last, 15 years is about the core right to self-defense. And Trump, fortunately, has Secret Service protection to take care of that for him, unlike, almost everyone else. Sure,
fair. Yeah, I mean, it's not so much a practical concern that he can't own guns because he's literally, the old saying of I carry a gun because I can't carry a cop. Well, literally he can carry many of them. They follow him around everywhere he goes. So it's not so much a practical concern. He's not Ronald Reagan, who carried a gun on himself as president, like a little snub-nosed revolver at points. But, it's much more of a rights question. It's much more of a political question. And it's just odd that was total radio. I mean, we talked about it a bit at the Reload, but it's just strange. Like, I understand that most gun voters are probably Trump supporters and would have perhaps gone along with, would have said it's fine that, I want to fight the prosecutions. I'm on Trump's side regardless, but just nothing. And none of his opponents tried to take that opening at all. I don't know. Just a weird thing that we've ended up here without even a peep about it leading up to this in the gun rights community. So, but that's, the political side. Is there anything else you see on the legal side here for the impact of these convictions?
No, I don't know if I mentioned it before. His voting rights won't be blocked as a felon because of a peculiarity of Florida law. Florida will defer to New York law because these are New York convictions. And New York law does not ban felons from voting who haven't been incarcerated. So as long as next month in July, he doesn't get a sentence of any jail time at all, he retains the right to vote, which of course is important for November, and I think important for his voters. Like, he still gets to vote for himself and other people on the ballot. So that one's fine. It's just that the federal law is going to govern the gun rights thing, and the federal law is just very broad, and it's a blanket ban, which says, if it's punishable by more than a year, you're banned.
It is. Although I guess in theory, maybe he could get his gun rights back before the election because of Rahimi. Let's say in Rahimi, they outline this dangerousness standard when they say, okay, Rahimi can be barred because there's direct evidence that he is actually dangerous. But maybe they point to range, or they offer some opinion
that would still be pretty far down the line. Even if they, the Supreme Court in July or June, before the end of June, says, okay, we're going to look at this through dangerousness, we would still need a lower court to throw out to vacate the federal statute that's unconstitutional.
Okay.
And then we could say, okay, he's no longer a prohibited person because that statute has been vacated. But that would also take some time.
Yeah, you don't think?
And I don't think
Supreme
it would.
Court.
Yeah, I mean, it goes from the Supreme Court to the circuit courts, who would have to hold briefing on it, which takes months, and then make a decision, which usually takes months. So even then, I think we'd be past November before we got an answer.
You don't foresee the court, even in the broadest possible opinion they could write in Rahimi, actually tossing out like the felon in possession ban as constructed today.
No, because they would be talking directly about the domestic violence restraining order ban. And the lower courts could then take that as persuasive as to the other parts of the federal ban list.
I see.
But, like I said, that takes time. I think, if we're talking about, can Trump get his rights back before the election, the likeliest possibility is if he succeeds in his appeal. He appeals immediately, which even there, I mean, he's got until August 10th to file his appeal. And that's just getting it in front of the court. Then we've got briefing, then we've got argument. It's a stretch to say that it would happen before the election, or before he, if he were to win the election, could he have his rights restored before Inauguration Day? Again, this stuff takes time. People hate that. People are always like, gosh, it seems like these cases move so slowly. The reason they move slowly is because you have procedural rights. He does have the right to appeal, and it has to be a meaningful appeal. He has to have an opportunity to prepare his briefs, for his lawyers to prepare his briefs. He has an opportunity to have oral argument in most cases, and it takes time.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the reasons a lot of these other cases have slipped to the point where they may not be heard at all before the election.
Right. Yeah, I would think it very unlikely we're going to see either of the federal cases before the election. And honestly, we may not see that Georgia RICO case for like 2 or 3 years. It's very large, very complicated, involving many defendants and many challenged actions, many crimes. And I don't see that one coming up anytime soon.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know where this all leads us. We could absolutely have a president that is barred from owning guns. We will have a presidential candidate in the pro-gun party, the pro-gun candidate of the two, who cannot own a firearm, and we may have a president who can't. In addition to all the other things that come along with being a convicted felon as well, at least until the rest of the appeals process in New York plays out. Because the president, even if he becomes president, he might be able to get rid of these federal cases, but not the state ones. Mm-hmm. Although, honestly, one of the things about Donald Trump and a second term for him is I don't really know what could and couldn't happen. We're in pretty uncharted territories all around here, which is not a great place for anyone for us to be. But regardless, I think we've covered the legal implications for Donald Trump's gun rights in all of this, and the possibilities that he might get them back at some point in the future, either through winning his appeal in this case or through a Second Amendment ruling that goes in the favor of not just him, but all kinds of nonviolent felons, or in theory, an expungement even. I mean, he did get that concealed carry license in New York before Bruin happened, which means that he was one of very few people who actually managed to do that at the time. So he's been able to get unusual things done. And so maybe he could get an expungement at some point in the future. Who knows?
Yep.
But I think that pretty well covers it. For anyone who wants to follow your, especially your writing, hopefully we could have you write some stuff for us at the Reload in the future. But where can they find you, and what's the best place to follow you?
Yes, I'm on Twitter at Gabriel Malor. I'm also on Blue Sky, gabrielmalor.bsky.social, which is so really weird. But I'm mostly at Blue Sky these days, and I'm still just doing legal commentary there.
Okay, cool. And you're writing for the Dispatch on and off?
I am. Yes, I am writing for them sometimes.
All right,
and
wonderful.
We'll likely be writing about Trump's continuing legal problem.
Well, there you go. People can follow your work there. We appreciate you coming on. Maybe we'll have you back on in the future to talk about perhaps some of those cases we mentioned and how they come down as they move through the court system and perhaps up to the Supreme Court itself. But that's all we've got for you guys this week. If you appreciate the kind of reporting we do here at the Reload, getting into these sorts of details that probably not many other people are talking about, and bringing up these issues before anyone else was, discussing them at all, you can head over to reload.com and sign up for our free newsletter today to check out our reporting, or you can buy a membership to help support what we do here. We are a member-funded organization. We are 100% independent, and we appreciate the support of our members. That is how we keep things going. It's how we keep the lights on. It's how we're able to do this. So consider buying a membership. You, of course, in addition to supporting us, will also get access to hundreds of pieces of analysis and reporting that you will not find anywhere else. You'll also get this podcast a day early and the opportunity to appear on the show if you want. Just reply to your also exclusive weekly Sunday members newsletter, letting us know that you want to be on the show, and we'll have you on for a member segment. That's all we got for you this week. We will see you guys again real soon.